Hello my friends, I hope you're having a wonderful day today, and welcome back to another episode of r/Nuclearrevenge, where you'll get to hear stories about people's lives getting absolutely nuked into oblivion. Guys, in today's episode, you'll hear two stories. The first one was sent to me by a subscriber who doesn't have a Reddit account, where he gets revenge on a landlord who sets a frickin' apartment on fire. And the second story is OP getting revenge on a conman who steals her life savings. Guys, before we get into the stories, please hit that like button if you enjoy hearing nuclear revenge stories, and do hit that subscribe button for future stories. This first story was sent to me by Adam, and it's titled, The Destruction of My Landlord. I regretfully got an apartment with what is my opinion the worst landlord ever. This man, who I'll call Entitled Dick, or ED, has the audacity to call himself a good person in court. Let me fill you in. I got an apartment shortly after being released from prison. I was happy that someone was gonna give me a chance to improve my life, and this was clearly not the case. All was well for the first few months, and then winter hit and the heat went out. It took 3 days to get ED to even answer his phone. By that time, his voicemail was full of complaints from his freezing cold tenants. He told me the law gave him a reasonable time frame to fix it. We went 2 more weeks with no heat, using our stoves and camping in the kitchen in our respective apartments. When ED got his electricity bill, he attempted to raise the rent on the apartments. This was obviously not allowed by the city, so he refused to pay his electricity bill, thus denying all of us heat at all. And this is where my OCD kicked in, and I went full research mode. I studied every law in regards to the federal, state, and city landlord-tenant laws and rights. I found so many violations that it was no longer funny but scary. I studied the building code. I studied the condition of all of his apartments. This was easier due to the fact that I was either good friends with his tenants or had gone there to repair damages caused by frozen pipes and electrical outlets failing due to shoddy wiring and so forth. ED had pissed off all of his tenants. Every last one was pissed to the point where they wanted to testify against him in court, but couldn't, due to the financial hardships the living conditions we're in had been causing. I formulated a plan to get him to repair the buildings that he owned, but ED had his own plan. On January 2nd at 2 a.m., I was awoken by the smoke detectors in the whole building going off. I quickly ran to the back hall, because no smoke was in my apartment yet, but I was on the top floor. I opened the door and was greeted by a thick wall of smoke. I quickly ran downstairs after, shouting for my girlfriend at the time to get out of the house quick. I pounded on every door and screamed fire as the smoke was quickly filling the hallways. I got as many people as possible to evacuate, but the floor that the fire was on, no one was answering, and to my knowledge, contained children, so I panicked. At this point, the fire department was there and began breaking in doors. The fire in the building was quickly spreading. 2 weeks later, the results were released. Arson. It turns out a tenant had used hairspray to start the fire and hid the evidence in a hole that she punched into the wall. I suspect that he paid her off for doing that. Ironically, she was the only tenant who had paid rent in the whole building because she had started moving in 2 days prior. I had not known that she was now a tenant, and her sister and kids had moved out the day before. I looked at ED and I told him I knew what he had done and was not going to rest until he lost all of his buildings. I then began asking his tenants for their stories about their interactions with ED, and this is where things got real. He had been accused of everything from ripping off employees, theft, Grand Theft Auto, bank fraud, and so much more. I formulated a new plan. I sucked up to him and made it known that I'm a computer tech. ED had quite a few broken computers and some printer and network issues, and I was in. We worked a deal on payment for back rent. I knew he was not good for his word, but it was all part of the plan. Once I got his password and logins, I copied his entire hard drive to my portable one. I copied all the emails in his business account and printed his financial records. After I fixed his computers and network, I then went home to review my newfound evidence. It was enough. More than enough. I contacted Code of Enforcement with all of the violations of code for every building, including the illegal electrical installation in his new office without permits or even an electrician. He was immediately investigated, and that night, I found a 7-day notice to quit on my door. My roommate was worried, but I filled him in on the plan. Remember that I studied all those laws and rights. Well, we get to court, and I open with, "Your Honor, I have proof of a clear violation of the warranty of the Habitability Act." The eviction was thrown out, and he was forced to repair my apartment with me still in it, immediately. The next month, I was given another eviction notice. He was still losing money due to the fact that I was teaching his tenants landlord rights and the laws associated with it. ED kept losing his court dates and kept being told to fix his stuff and was continuously fined by the courts and the code enforcement. He was sinking fast. I wasn't done yet. We went to court again for my non-payment of rent. I won again based on the Landlord Retaliation Act because I had contacted code enforcement and can prove this blatant retaliation, and the judge didn't even listen to ED. Needless to say, spending the winter without heat took a toll on us tenants. We bought electric heaters and informed the power company that the landlord had shut off all the power to his building and was requiring tenants to pay for their own power. Well, apparently, his illegal wiring caught up to him. He had wired the apartments to run off each other, and the common areas were now attached to wiring in every apartment. This put ED in a rough position, as local law says it's the landlord's responsibility to supply power to all the common areas. This means his shoddy workmanship and illegal wiring prevents him from legally disconnecting the power. The power company turned on all the power and locked his ability to shut it off until all the wiring in the common areas was repaired and separated from the apartments. And this would cost thousands of dollars, thousands that we knew he didn't have. ED was panicking. He kept losing in courts, people were legally withholding rent, and he couldn't shut off services, and the fines were debilitating. He kept blaming his tenants and refused to repair things. One by one, the buildings were condemned, and ED was required to pay for relocation of his tenants by law. And he didn't. He couldn't. He was arrested for attempting to sell 3 buildings that the city confiscated from him, and for selling one that was condemned. He wanted to get a lawyer, but he couldn't afford it. ED got what he deserved. He lost every building that he owned, got charged with all kinds of fraud, and was investigated for other crimes that I'm still unaware of. But I wasn't done. He caused a lot of suffering. I gave his financial records to the IRS with all of the internal memos and everything I got from his computers. I also provided the local authorities and code enforcement with the same things. ED was so screwed. I've since gotten a new apartment, and everything he owned has been taken by the city, state, and IRS. I have not seen ED in 3 years, and all of his properties have been bought by someone new, and all the new tenants are happy with their landlords. Oh, and about ED and the lady who started the fire. The woman living there who started the fire was arrested for first-degree arson and charged with 2 counts due to the fire that turned out to be intentional, and she ratted him out, saying that he was the one who paid her to set the fire so she could get less jail time. In the end, he's serving multiple sentences for crimes that he's committed, and he's not getting out for at least 5 to 10 years, since they also charged him with first-degree arson as an accomplice. ED is somewhere in some prison, regretting meeting this tenant. Oh my goodness, OP was the wrong person to mess with in this story. ED does really take the cake on being a horrendous landlord. Who the heck starts a fire in an apartment building with people still inside sleeping? A freaking psychopath, that's who. He deserves all those years in prison, no doubt about it. Let me know your opinions on the story by voting in this poll. This next story is by user Elixir_MTL, and it's titled, "Someone stole $25,000 from me, and it ended up costing him $500,000. A preamble. I was married to a very OCD and pragmatic man. For example, for him, a big romantic gesture had been to leave me alone for 24 hours at the hospital right after I had our son, so he could go pay the bills and mow the lawn. I was in dire need of physical contact because he never touched me unless he wanted sex, and he also never kissed me. But this story is not about him, it's only a preamble. So I divorced him, not just for what's above, mind you. I felt alone and unloved in this relationship. I just wrote about it to explain the state of mind I was in when I met this other person that we'll call PS. PS was the total opposite. He was very in tune with his emotions. He was very, very intense, and this will be important later. He really showed me love like I thought I needed. On our first date, the waitress asked how long we'd been together. Since he was so into me and touching me, he made me feel amazing. He had this huge house and a rather flashy lifestyle, so I assumed he was really well off. He told me he owned a car wash and a phone marketing company. Fast forward a bit, at this point, we had been dating for about a year, and he had just asked me and my son to move in with him. I wasn't 100% sure, but he prepared the room for my son nonetheless. As I started spending more time in his house, I started to see strange behavior. He'd be up all night, but sleep all day. I also overheard a few phone calls where he was telling people they owed money and needed to pay, but the conversations didn't fit with a car wash or a phone marketing business. At some point, he told me he was having money problems and said huge clients were late in paying and that it was jeopardizing his house payments. So I, stupid me, offered to help. It ended up with me lending him $25,000, and I cannot for the life of me remember that progression. The loan was supposed to be for 3 weeks, he said. I'd have it all back in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. That $25,000 was basically my life savings. It came from my retirement savings and my son's college money, so I had to pay a fine to access it. It also took me 10 years to put aside. That money was very important to me. During those 3 weeks, I went out to have drinks with my friends, and I found him on a date with another woman. I saw him touching and kissing another woman. I said nothing. I went to his house, packed my stuff, and I left. So anyway, I thought he'd be an adult and would reimburse the $25,000 at the end of the 3 weeks, which was a big mistake. Someone I knew told me he was glad I left and proceeded to tell me about him. They told me that PS was a con man, a specialist in defrauding older people by phone, and that was his so-called phone marketing company. I wasn't sure I believed it, but then bits of what I overheard in the last year started to make sense, and I realized it was all true. I tried getting my money back in many different ways, none of which worked. I was at the end of my rope, and since it was in my year post-divorce, I basically used my life savings. I was poor as hell, so this is what I did. First, he had given me access to pay bills online, not to his bank accounts, but to his emails. So I was able to investigate all of his accounts with the same password, and I printed and screenshot every little bit of information relating to money. I found proof that he was indeed scamming people, and found the people he worked with, and even the name of the person at Western Union who facilitated the money transfer. I found out that he was an organized criminal. I also found out that he did this between US and Canada. I started preparing for Nuclear Strike 1. So for Strike 1, I printed his face and the face of everyone working for him and with him that were defrauding people and left hundreds of flyers in the neighborhood. I also called the hotline for financial crime prevention in both Canada and the US and gave very specific details and names. Strike 2. I was dumb in lending him money, but at least I did it the right way. I was smart enough to write a check. I didn't do cash because I wanted a paper trail, and it turns out it was a great idea. On the check, I had written that it was a loan. Thank you, Judge Judy, for the tip. Since he didn't pay me back, I prepared an invoice and sent it to me from his hacked email. When the time came to do my taxes, I filed the $25,000 as an expense using his invoice, and it passed. Strike 3. Don't ask me how I got his social security number, but I ended up having access to it, so I ratted him out to the IRS for hiding income. I found out later on through friends that the IRS started investigating him for unpaid taxes. I heard he had to pay 38% in taxes on that $25,000, plus pay a 20% fine for not declaring income. At this point, I was satisfied. I figured $9,500 in taxes plus $5,000 in fines was 50% of what he owed me. At least he didn't get away with it all. Remember that I told you on the check that I had written that it was a loan. So I decided to take him to court, and I won. Since he didn't even show up, he had to reimburse the full $25,000 plus court fees, plus what he owes to the IRS, so it's $39,500. $2,500 that he was to pay for not reimbursing the $25,000. To this day, I still haven't seen a cent, but the rest of the story makes it worthwhile. At first, I thought the financial crime call I made had no effect. Well, now it's the cherry on top. What I didn't know at the time was that the IRS would team up with the wire fraud division and look at everything he did. They were not able to catch him on wire fraud, but since the house he had did not fit with the money he was declaring, they got him on tax evasion and gave him a certain delay to pay back taxes. I heard it was only 3 months, but I don't know if it was accurate. They got him so good that they ended up freezing his accounts and he lost his house, and his debt to the IRS is still open. My $25,000 that he didn't want to repay me ended up costing him over $500,000. And since you cannot go bankrupt for a debt you owe to the government, I'm happy to tell you that at 40 years old, he had to move back with his parents and ask for welfare, and will probably be paying this for the rest of his life. The story is not finished, however. I just learned now that he has a job as a concierge in the apartment building of his parents, so I'll be contacting the court to have money he owes me taken directly from his pay. The last thing is, he has no idea that I'm the culprit of all of his bad fortune, and he recently sent me a message telling me that he misses me, that I was an angel for him, and he regrets what he did. Well, not me, loser. Not me. Well done, OP. I hope you end up getting that $25,000 back from him. And unfortunately, this post has been up for a year, and there's still no updates. And that, my friends, is the end of another episode of r/Nuclearrevenge. If you guys enjoyed the stories, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future stories. I upload every day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.